Japan bought America's rejected Airliner and tried to turn it into the future of long-range air warfare. What they built instead became one of the most tragic failures in World War II aviation history. In the tense years before Pearl Harbor, when nations were racing not just to rearm, but to outthink one another, Japanese engineers believed they had discovered a shortcut, a way to leapfrog years of research and steal the future of air power. On October 30th, 1939, at a quiet Los Angeles airfield called Mines Field, a massive four-engine aircraft sat unwanted. The U.S. Army Air Corps had examined it and walked away. Airlines had tested it and rejected it. To Americans, it was an embarrassment. To Japan, it looked like destiny. The aircraft was the Douglas DC-4E, and once it crossed the Pacific, it would be reborn as something else entirely. Few realized that this single decision would haunt Japan for the rest of the war. By the late 1930s, Japan's military planners were obsessed with distance. Unlike Germany, whose enemies lay across land borders, Japan faced the reality of a future war fought across endless oceans. Any decisive strike would require aircraft capable of flying farther than anything the Imperial Japanese Navy had ever built. The Navy Air Service wanted a true heavy bomber, not a modified medium aircraft or a compromised design, but a machine that could carry heavy bomb loads over vast distances, strike American bases, and return without refueling. Japan's aviation industry was brilliant but narrow. It excelled at lightweight fighters like the A6M0, yet it had almost no experience designing massive four-engine aircraft. Developing such a bomber from scratch would take years. Japan believed it did not have. Meanwhile, in the United States, Douglas Aircraft was experimenting with the future of civilian aviation. The DC-4E was meant to revolutionize commercial flight with advanced electrical systems, pressurization concepts, and an enormous wingspan of nearly 140 feet, but it proved too heavy, too complex, and too impractical. The Army Air Corps rejected it, and airlines followed. That was when Japanese representatives appeared, officially civilians, but unofficially military. Through Nippon Koku Keitei, Japan purchased the aircraft outright. It was dismantled, crated, and quietly shipped across the Pacific, arriving in Japan like a captured secret. For engineers at Nakajima Aircraft Company, the aircraft inspired awe. But that awe would soon turn into anxiety. The project was designated G5, given the name Shinzan, meaning mountain recess. On paper, it looked like everything Japan had dreamed of. Four engines, long wings, a deep bomb bay capable of carrying more than 4,000 kilograms of ordnance, and heavy defensive armament. But paper does not feel stress. Metal does. The DC-4E had been designed around American manufacturing realities. Precision machining, high-quality aluminum alloys, and an industrial depth Japan simply did not possess. By early 1940, Nakajima engineers began encountering problems they could not ignore. Wing spars failed to align perfectly, rivets loosened under vibration, electrical systems overheated in Japan's humid climate. Hydraulics leaked under sustained pressure. The most serious problem was the engines. Japan had no true heavy bomber power plant, forcing the Shinzan to rely on the experimental Nakajima NK-7A Mamoru 11. It was underpowered and unreliable. Each engine was supposed to deliver 1,870 horsepower, but in reality, performance dropped sharply under combat loads. During extended ground testing, crews reported dangerous temperature spikes and unstable oil pressure. Every attempted fix made the aircraft heavier, and every improvement stole performance. Still, the Navy pressed forward. War was coming, and delay was unacceptable. By late 1940, the first prototype stood on the runway. Massive, imposing, and deeply troubled. Even before takeoff, fear gripped the test crews. In April 1941, the Shinzan made its maiden flight. As the throttles advanced, the four engines roared, yet the aircraft barely accelerated. The runway seemed endless, as if the Earth itself were resisting. At the last possible moment, the bomber lifted free, climbing slowly and dangerously. Inside the cockpit, warning lights flickered as engine temperatures climbed. Control forces were heavy and unresponsive, with every adjustment lagging behind the pilot's intent. Once airborne, the problems multiplied. The aircraft vibrated under power, stability was poor, and any engine failure would almost certainly be fatal. After just 30 minutes, the crew aborted the test. Landing was even worse. The Shinzan floated far down the runway before slamming onto the ground with bone-shaking force. Tires burst, and stress rippled through the airframe. Subsequent flights brought no relief. Fully loaded, the aircraft could barely climb. With defensive armament installed, including 20mm cannons and machine guns, performance dropped to absurd levels. The bomber could not outrun fighters, could not climb above interception altitude, and could barely reach operational height at all. By late 1941, the conclusion was unavoidable. The Imperial Japanese Navy officially declared the G5N Shinzan unsuitable for combat operations. Years of effort had produced an aircraft that could not fight, and Japan was running out of time. The Navy refused to admit total defeat. Instead, the Shinzan was quietly reclassified. Some airframes were stripped of weapons and converted into long-range transports. Others were used for experimental testing. A few never flew again, parked, cannibalized, and abandoned. By 1943, American B-29 Superfortresses began appearing over the Pacific, the very kind of aircraft Japan had tried and failed to build. The contrast was devastating. The B-29 flew higher, farther, carried heavier bomb loads, and most importantly, it worked. Japan's stolen airliner, once seen as a shortcut to dominance, had become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. The Shinzan never bombed an enemy city, never engaged in air combat, and never influenced the outcome of a single battle. Its failure was silent but catastrophic, measured not in wreckage or casualties, but in lost years, wasted resources, and missed strategic opportunity. Only 6 G5N Shinzan aircraft were ever completed, and none survived the war. No medals were awarded, no victories recorded, and no pilots became aces flying it. Yet, the Shinzan remains one of the most important cautionary tales in military aviation history. It proves that technology cannot simply be bought and copied, and that air power depends not just on aircraft designs, but on infrastructure, experience, and time. Japan's engineers were skilled, dedicated, and courageous, but courage could not overcome physics, metallurgy, or industrial reality. In the end, America's rejected airliner did not give Japan the future it hoped for. It gave them a mirror, one that reflected the limits of ambition in a world already at war. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to Past Horizon as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.